At this point in Paul's journeys, relationships have been built, but he hasn't begun to write any of his New Testament letters. That's all about to change when Paul begins his second and his third journeys. At the end of Acts 15, Paul and Barnabas decide to revisit the Christians in the cities they had preached to during their first journey. Unfortunately, they run into a wrinkle when Barnabas wants to take Mark and Paul disagrees. In the end, Paul and Barnabas split up, Barnabas taking Mark with him and Paul taking a young man named Silas instead. Paul and Silas revisit the congregations of Lystra and Derbe, amongst others, and eventually they end up in the port town of Troas. Along the way, they pick up some more helpers for the work, a man named Timothy, to whom Paul will eventually write the letters 1st and 2nd Timothy, and a doctor named Luke. This is the same Luke that would write the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. In Troas, Paul is given a vision by God and told to cross over into the region of Macedonia. This is entirely new territory for Paul. Macedonia is Greek land, very pagan and very idolatrous. In Macedonia, Paul will visit the town of Philippi, and a flourishing and powerful young congregation will start in that city. The church there is the one Paul will later write Philippians to. From Philippi, Paul will travel next to the city of Thessalonica. Having only been there a few short weeks in Acts 17, Paul will be driven out of town by the Jews that are jealous of how well received he is by the Gentiles. When Paul's driven from Thessalonica, he leaves Timothy behind to report to him how the young church is doing under such difficult conditions. Paul continues to travel through cities like Berea and Athens and eventually ends up in the city of Corinth, where Timothy catches up with him. It is from Corinth in Acts 18 that Paul would write 2 letters to the church in Thessalonica, after Timothy tells him how well they're doing. 1st and 2nd Thessalonians are those letters, and they are upbeat letters because Paul is proud of the brethren in Thessalonica. Though they're young, they have stayed faithful, and Paul corrects them with some of their misunderstandings caused by that immaturity. 1st and 2nd Thessalonians explain things like the return of Jesus, what happens when you die, and the importance of working hard and remaining faithful and steadfast in your faith for your whole life. Leaving Corinth, Paul will make his way back to Antioch in Acts 18:22, and that will end his second journey. For his third journey, Paul will revisit many of the same congregations, but the most notable change in this journey will be the time he spends in Ephesus. Previously, Paul had only spent a few days in Ephesus, but on this journey he spends almost 2 years. In Ephesus, Paul will teach Christ in a schoolhouse, and people will receive the good news and then spread the word throughout all of Asia. During these exciting times in Ephesus, Paul will hear that the church in Corinth is struggling with division and false teaching. And Paul will write the 1st Corinthian letter, a letter that's a strong rebuke. He'll rebuke them for their divisiveness, and he'll warn them that they may in fact be rejecting Jesus. After 2 years, Paul will leave Ephesus when an angry mob attempts to ensnare him. Leaving Ephesus, he'll travel again through Macedonia, and he'll write the 2nd Corinthian letter when he finds out that, much to his relief, the Corinthians have responded to his first letter with godly sorrow and repentance. As hard as 1 Corinthians was to write, 2 Corinthians is the opposite. It's practically gushing with gratitude and thanksgiving at the humility of the church in Corinth. When Paul leaves Macedonia and visits Corinth to see that church face to face, he'll stay in Corinth for 3 months. And during that 3-month time period, he will write the letter to the church in Rome, also known as Romans, and likely he wrote Galatians at that time too. These letters address the nature of salvation and how important it is that we understand we are saved by our faith and commitment to Christ, not because our works have earned it. We must work faithfully for Him, but faithful work is not the same as perfect work. Having seen Corinth with his own eyes, Paul leaves to return to his ancestral homeland, Israel, and the city of Jerusalem. When Paul reaches Jerusalem, his third journey will end, but his troubles will just begin.